So we've had lots of discussions on English proficiency for Jays. This is going to be our first conversation specific for academic health institutions. And so we had originally on our panel, we also had Mario Sanchez from Houston Methodist. He has experience from multiple institutions, including UT Southwestern. He was going to talk about his experience. He's not able to make it because of events with his family. So it is going to be me and Kimberly and me today. So quick introduction. I'm Moroni Flake. In 2015, we started working with a number of organizations on their J-1 English proficiency requirements and helping them meet those requirements. And you'll notice that's the year when the Subpart A requirements were updated. They were released in January of 2015. And shortly after that, we met Kimberly. We began working with Texas A&M, which I see is on the call. We began working with a number of other institutions as well. And so in the time since then, I've had probably hundreds of conversations with universities as well as the Department of State around J-1 English proficiency. And we've run a series of surveys, which we'll present today. And so that's a quick overview of me and my experience over the last decade when it comes to J-1 English proficiency.
Hello, good afternoon from Kansas City. This is Kimberly Connelly. I serve as the Senior International Officer at the University of Kansas Medical Center. I'm also the Director of the Office of International Programs. We serve 3 campuses, one in Kansas City, Kansas, one in Wichita, and one in Salina. And this particular topic is of great interest to me because I've always been in international education, but my original area was TESOL. And so I have a lot of experience and a lot of years teaching English as a second language and around English proficiency. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. In no way do I feel like we're the experts on this topic. We can simply share our experience, our challenges, our successes, and we'd love to hear from you. It's a conversation. I never like to say this is a presentation. It's a conversation. So please feel free to share in the chat. Unmute yourself if you're comfortable with that. This is a casual group of friends.
Yeah, we like to just keep an active conversation going and kind of facilitate understanding across institutions, see what others are doing. So yeah, go ahead, Kimberly.
So again, just as a recap, the regulation on English proficiency, which came out in January 2015, stated the exchange visitor possesses a sufficient proficiency in the English language as determined by an objective measurement of English language proficiency to successfully participate in his or her program and to function on a day-to-day basis. A sponsor must verify an applicant's English language proficiency through a recognized English language test by signed documentation from an academic institution or English language school, or through a documented interview conducted by the sponsor, either in person or by video conferencing or by telephone if video conferencing is not a viable option. Next slide.
So yeah, just want to highlight really quickly a couple things really quickly. So we'll dive into a little bit more about an objective measurement, what that might mean. Obviously, up to interpretation. We'll dive into the importance on functioning on a day-to-day basis outside of the lab. And then one other thing is I just want to highlight is by the sponsor. There's different interpretations of what that means. And I had a recent conversation with some Department of State reps. And in that conversation, she said specifically, one of the individuals on the call said specifically, the sponsor refers to the RO or the ARO, not to the sponsoring department or the PI. And I said, well, pause 1 second. Can you say that again? And she said, yeah, the sponsor is referring to the ARO or the RO. And we went in depth into the conversations. Well, that's not the not from my experience with the with ROs and AROs, that's not the general understanding, and that's not often what is in practice. And she said she understood that, but ultimately the responsibility comes back to the RO or the ARO. And so she said that they should be present for all of those, or they essentially are they are the one responsible for validating that proficiency. And so that was what came from that conversation. I know there are different ways that that's being implemented in different institutions. I would say that at most or at many institutions, that's just not practical. It's not going to be something where the ARO can be present, especially at the larger hosting institutions. And so that was kind of a back and forth conversation there. But I just wanted to offer that as some perspective that they had.
I just add too, one way we deal with that is KOMC as an institution is the sponsor, and the ARO and RO are the representatives. The department or the PI is a host. So that's one way we differentiate at our institution on that. They're not the sponsor, they are the host. And so that also might help when you are, talking about this regulation. Because words, just the differentiates on the word can matter. And then as the ARO or the RO, we're attesting or verifying that this English proficiency has been met, and it's been met from an objective source. So the US guidance directive says that the department, even though they had this new rule, the department has observed in 2019 from outreach and site reviews that exchange visitors with noticeably poor English speaking skills, which may indicate a sponsor has not screened the prospective candidates for English language proficiency consistent with the regulation. And inadequate English skills may lead to program deficiencies and compromise the health, safety, and welfare of exchange visitors. And, this is a really important point, because we all know that the exchange visitor program does not want to have anything that would bring the program into disrepute, right? They want to protect their reputation. They want to protect the program. And having the English language skills is an important part of that, because without it, there could be safety issues. There's certainly some question about the quality of the program as well. So we want you to consider this, and Moroni already touched on this. The responsible officer who represents the institution, the international individual, and the US government has a unique position, has unique responsibility, and has unique authority. So the RO and AROs, it's a regulatory compliance position. And so as a regulatory compliance position, we have that responsibility to ensure that the institution aligns with any of the regulations or requirements. In my experience at an academic health center, there tends to be more credence given to specialty and areas of expertise. I think it's because, doctors and PhDs, they consider themselves experts. And so they are really, let's say, generous, and they're recognizing other people's expertise. Additionally, they're used to following regulations. So I've had a really good experience at KU Med in that if we say this is a regulation, if we say this is mandatory, people will follow. They just want to know how. They just want to know, how do we do this? What do we have to do? In that respect, PIs, their interest is their research and getting their research done. And that puts them in a bit of a biased position when it comes to evaluating English language skills. Not all of them are actually experts in that area, even if they speak English as a first language. I like to think, as someone with a master's degree in TESOL, that it is an area of expertise that not everybody has. Not everybody is able to evaluate a person's, English skills. in any way, we want to take that responsibility off of the PI. We want to take that time constraint off of the PI and facilitate something that keeps us compliant and consistent without bias.
Sorry, I was on mute. And okay, so we have conducted 5 surveys, uh, basically every 2 years since 2016, and this is not specific to academic health institutions. It's across the board, so it includes many, but it also includes other institutions. So the responses are from 235 different institutions and 511 responses. Primary responses are coming from the International Services Office directors, associate directors, or advisors. That's the primary audience. There are some responses from other individuals as well. And I would say that these represent large and small populations. There are a few, most trends, most responses are representative across all institutions. But if there is a difference between a large and a small institution, I'll highlight that. Really, we started off by wanting to benchmark, are we all coming with the same perspective on English proficiency? So which statement best represents your view of J-1 English proficiency? 95% of respondents said English proficiency is always crucial to the success of the exchange visit, or occasionally crucial. So very, very few responded otherwise. I would say I kind of threw this last one in as a little bit of a joke, not thinking it would be responded to, but it was a few times. And so that's the response there is about English proficiency. That's on the departments. We just processed the DS 2019. And so we just kind of talked about that a little bit with the AR and the ARO and the RO. But I thought that was interesting. Okay, what are the risks of J1s arriving with insufficient English proficiency? So number one is inability to understand their rights and responsibilities as a visitor to the US. I would say that that's especially relevant now, given enforcements that's coming to international populations. And so that's a very in-demand topic. And so I would say that is especially essential now. Second response was isolation or inability to integrate into the community. Next was health and safety. Many institutions that we've talked to have had different experiences there. I'll go into one or two later on. So poor cultural experience. This aligns well with the purpose of the Fulbright Hayes Act, and the ultimate purpose of the J1 visa category is cultural exchange, and so that aligns well there. And then the next response was inability to participate in the program. The bottom two responses, concerns about a State Department audit or visit or sending a visitor home. Those were less responded to, but I will say that over the years, it has significantly increased. So in our first survey, I think 8% of universities were concerned with that or had experienced that, and so it's increased since then, almost threefold. So there's a few comments on those. Has your institution shortened an exchange visit due to insufficient English proficiency? 11% said yes. 8% said I don't want to tell you, and then 42% said no, but English proficiency has been a concern. And so here's an instructive response from a medical institute. She said, we had a number of scholars arrive with low English proficiency within a short time period, one of which did result in the scholar having to return home. This is why we feel so strongly that independent assessment of English proficiency is so important. She said that one of the scholars couldn't pass the "How was your flight?" English test at the check-in. So there was that. When an English interview is needed, who conducts the interview? So this is the response that we received in 2015, just after the Subpart A requirements were updated. And so 93% of respondents said that the sponsoring department is ultimately signing off on the English proficiency for the individual, whether that's through an interview or some sort of affidavit to sign off on that requirement. And then over the intervening years, we've seen this number evolve and change. So in 2018, only 77% of of international offices allowed the PI to conduct the interview. Today, that number's down to 52% of respondents allow the PI to conduct the interview. I will say that that trend is most prominent amongst mid-sized state-owned institutions. The largest institutions, some of them have made transitions, yeah, I would say that it's most notable among mid-sized to large state institutions that have made that transition, and that's probably where institutions that are a little bit more decentralized are more likely to allow that PI interview.
Mm-hmm.
And then when an English interview is needed, who completes the interview? This is now, and well, this is the last one in 2024. So 52% said the sponsoring department or PI, 23% said a third-party English assessment, 8% said the English language department, 8% said they just don't allow an interview at all, and then 8% said somebody from the international office or designated individual conducts those interviews. So I know there's a lot of numbers on this slide. I'll just kind of do a quick overview and highlight important areas. So what drawbacks are associated with the current method of completing interviews? So for those who responded that the department conducts the interview, 96% said that there may be a conflict of interest. 73% said that the individuals are not qualified to evaluate English proficiency. 36% said it's not best practice, and 34% said time required to conduct the interviews. For those offices where the international office conducts the interview, they said it's not best practice, the time required to conduct the interview, and scheduling constraints. You know, the most common sending countries are Asia, East Asia. So that presents challenges for scheduling those interviews often. And then for those that have an English language or IEP, they highlighted the same challenges, but for the most part, if it's working well for them, if that's an option. And then for a third-party assessment, if they've been able to move to a third-party assessment, generally pretty happy with it. Okay, what is your perspective of the current English policy? This is the percent responding satisfied based upon the different options. So least satisfied are the sponsoring departments, and most satisfied are the third-party English assessment. I want to highlight this one as kind of an interesting takeaway. Once we divided the data based upon directors versus scholar advisors, we started to see very different responses. And so 38% of scholar advisors were satisfied with the current policy of allowing the departments to conduct the interview, and 68% of directors were satisfied with that policy. So nearly double the number of directors. And so why might this be happening? Maybe because scholars are doing check-in on orientation. They're the ones fielding emails and interacting with scholars, and oftentimes more likely to see challenges. Directors might be more attuned to the politics of trying to change the policy. So and then be more motivated to be satisfied. So just not not really clear as to what is driving these differences, but it is an interesting thought activity to say, okay, where else in your office might this be? There might be a gap between the advisor's perspectives and the director's perspective. Okay, what elements of your J-1 English process would you like to improve? Number one response is consistency. So scholars consistently arriving with English proficiency. Now, second response is improve the J-1 applicant experience. I'll highlight some of the things that we've asked J-1 applicants, because we've had thousands of responses from J-1s on, hey, what's important to you? And well, I'll just kind of give the summary away. Most important factors for them are going to be convenience. Can they do it on their own schedule? Can they do it quickly? Can they do it online? Can they do it quickly? Speed, can they get their response back quickly? Can they get, can they have their scores back if they're doing a test or an interview? Can they have their scores back quickly? Can they just go through it without getting held up? 18% of them identified cost as a concern, which was lower than we expected that it would be. And so there was the improving the J-1 applicant experience. That's kind of what to focus on, is convenience and speed. And then reducing liability. 49% said they would like to reduce liability, and then further responses from there. If there's anything that you specifically think of, it's something that you would want to improve, you could throw that in the chat. And then, yeah, scholars' concerns, I'll just highlight this top section here. So 19% of J1s reported that they're not confident in their own ability to communicate in an emergency. That is self-reported by scholars. And 31% of J1 said they're not confident in their dependent's ability to communicate in an emergency. So if at least the J1 is proficient sufficiently to communicate for the dependent, that can mitigate many issues. But yeah, I thought this was interesting that nearly a third of J1 said that they were not confident in their dependent's ability to communicate in an emergency. So back to Kimberly.
Great. I would just like to say, for me, every time I see the survey results, and I know we've gone through them a couple of times, I see something new, and it's so interesting. I really appreciate the fact that your company has put the time into that. And I think it also shows like just an array of different ideas and different issues, and some of which I'll try to circle back to because they really stuck out to me. So I would like to say that I was kind of in a unique position at the University of Kansas Medical Center, and that I was hired in 2013. And we right away started putting together policies and procedures and kind of putting our arms around this whole exchange visitor situation. We had other issues. We had exchange visitors, coming for 5 years unpaid, which I know some people have no issues with that. We do. We felt like there could be a lot of issues when someone comes, on a J1 they only speak Chinese into a Chinese lab, going back to what Moroni said about isolation. So we wanted to ensure that people weren't just coming and working 24/7 for 5 years, avoiding some of those really bad issues in labs. So we have a cultural plan requirement where the PI and the department have to prove and show what type of cultural engagement they're providing for their exchange visitors. We have lots of, events and opportunities that we sponsor out of OIP. And we notice if a PI is resistant to allowing their exchange visitor to participate. And we track those type of things and make note of it, because there's a problem if our exchange visitors can't participate in one of the regulations, which is cultural engagement. And if English is a reason for that, that's another concern. So because I came in 2013 and the regulation came out in 2015, we just right away, took the lead on that. Because my background was in English, as a second language teaching, TESOL, I helped to develop our English proficiency policy and requirement for, academic English already. And people run a lot of things by me. And so for the J1, we just decided we would implement a lot of the same things. We could take a standardized English test, of course, IELTS, TOEFL, at a different level than the academic English. Obviously, if a person has been educated in English and can prove that with a letter from the institution or through their transcript, we take that. We are sensitive to the needs of our labs and our PIs, and sometimes they want things done tomorrow. They want their researcher to arrive very, very soon. And we understood that taking a TOEFL or an IELTS would be, an obstacle. If they didn't already have proof, we realized that could take some time. And so we designed an interview that I would give. We had a repository of questions so that those couldn't be shared with other exchange visitors. We were concerned that the PI would get our questions and share them in advance with their exchange visitors. So we tried to put some things in place to prevent that. We created the questions. I created a rubric, and we had a progression from simple to more, compound, complex sentences with different varying verb tenses. And that was great. It worked as long as it worked. But as you can imagine, life continues to expand and my responsibilities and our programs. And I really just couldn't keep up with the demand. And luckily, I met Moroni in English 3 around that time. And so we were able to work together. Some of the other challenges was, time differences. So not just not having time, but being able to meet with the exchange visitor. But I will say one of the positives for me was getting to know the exchange visitor prior to arrival. I really enjoy that. I enjoy connecting with people and talking to them, and I kind of miss that. But having something that is an outside test that is convenient and inexpensive, and we can get the test results right away, was necessary and very helpful. When we met with Mario, he actually had a really different challenge from me in that because they weren't like in charge of the English proficiency and they were allowing PIs to conduct the interviews, they actually had situations where exchange visitors showed up without sufficient English. Much like what Moroni had said, they couldn't pass the "How was your flight?" question. And they had to send some exchange visitors home. For me, that's almost unimaginable after going through the visa attainment process, moving to the United States. And we know a lot of these individuals, resign from their position. They invest $5,000 to come here to set up a new place and then to have to go home. To me, that's like horrible. I can't even imagine. And as the RO or ARO, it is our obligation to do that. And we definitely become the bad person. And that's not a way to build relationships at an institution. So I wouldn't want to be in that position. I just wouldn't, I can't even fathom being in that position and being able to manage the politics of that. So I'd rather manage the politics of policies and processes that protect everybody.
Every time I go to unmute myself, I end up messing up the slides. Okay, sorry about that. So I'll really briefly hit on a few other institutions and some of the conversations that we've had. So we presented at the National Officer Conference on this topic with Brigham Young University and the University of Florida. They had a University of Florida had a 3-year audit that they went through, and Brigham Young University had a site visit, and that shed some light on on their policies. And essentially what happened when the site visit happened at Brigham Young University, there was also a site visit at the University of Utah at the same time. And it was the same message to both audiences. They discussed English proficiency. They highlighted that the PI conducting the interview is subjective, not objective. It's not an objective third party. It is a subjective conversation. So for them, they didn't see that as alignment with the requirements. And so what had happened was they had a conversation. They said, have you had any challenges with scholars arriving without proficiency? And they, were very upfront, and they said yes. They had one particular scholar recently, and they had added an English proficiency program to that scholar after they had arrived. And the Department of State's response to that was that was inappropriate. That wasn't initially in their program, and that they stated this, quote here at the bottom, that if a scholar arrives without English proficiency, it is the responsibility of the RO to send the scholar home within 30 days. Mm-hmm. So that was Brigham Young University's experience. Just a real quick highlight there. And then the other one is University of Florida. And I'm very happy to connect anybody on the call with either of these institutions to go more in depth with their experiences. But what happened here was there was a health incident with a scholar. And on the second line here, you'll see essential treatment and support were greatly hampered as a result of his or her inability to effectively speak English. And so this kicked off what ultimately was a 3-year audit of their internal processes. And so they made a few adjustments. They started with more of an educational approach with their with their departments. We did a lunch and learn in person in 2019, where we talked about, they talked about, their RO talked about the importance of English proficiency to the departments. I attended that meeting as well, and we talked about English 3 as an option, and about 30 about the departments representing about 35% of the incoming scholars decided that they were going to remove the PI interview of their own volition, and then in its place, keep all of the other existing options when it comes to TOEFL, IELTS, English from another institution, or add English 3 as an option. And so when they didn't have those options, that became a convenient option. But the remaining departments, they had a few challenges, and over the following 2 years, there were 3 or 4 scholars that were sent home, and that flagged an issue back to the Department of State, where they came back and said, again, it looks like there's still challenges, and they reiterated that this second line here, that they needed to submit through they needed it to be documented through a video or voice recording or thorough notes. They needed more emphasis on the English proficiency, and then again reiterated that if an EV is found to have inadequate English skills after arriving for official check-in, the individual should return home as soon as possible, but no later than 30 days from the program begin date. And then they were, eventually what happened at the University of Florida is they were able to get sufficient buy-in from deans and others that they removed the PI interview altogether. What we see is kind of a combination of, I'll just highlight this one really quickly because I think it's relevant right now, is we see a combination of different transitions or policies. So some, where it's feasible and it makes sense, where they are having challenges, they do remove the PI interview. But often, more frequently, they take more iterative steps in the process. So they might do, as the University of Florida did, an education first approach with their departments, and having conversations of at least highlighting challenges to leadership, and starting the conversation of what might be an option there. Some institutions, I'm aware of one Ivy League institution that essentially what they did is they said that the department can still verify English proficiency, but it cannot be a direct supervisor. And so that did move it, that they feel like that has been a good first step in the process. And so there's different approaches. You can very much do an education first approach, but yeah. So there's certainly different approaches to the process. I'll kick it back to Kimberly.
Thank you, Moroni. Yeah, and I'm just going to circle back again to implementing new policies and procedures. And I want to say again, and I cannot reiterate enough, that each institution is a unique culture, a unique place, and I cannot speak for across the board or make it seem, I don't want it to seem like it'll be so easy or simple for you. I am lucky in that my boss, the Vice Chancellor of Academic and Student Affairs, reports directly to our EVC, who reports directly to our Chancellor. And I am given a lot of breadth for my work, and pretty much if I say something is required by the regulations, that's all that matters, and it's taken as the law because it is the law. And so I'm able to create our policy. We do, present our ideas to HR and work very closely with HR. We work very closely with department chairs. Sometimes we have a little bit of a marketing strategy where we have meetings with individuals and then go wider to departments to present new ideas in order to get buy-in, because that's important that people understand and that they support what we're doing. But we don't really give them the power to say no, because I do feel like and I'm the ARO, I'm the PDSO and the ARO, and my counterpart, Arena, is the RO, but we feel like we're the ones who are attesting. I don't want to take a PI's word for someone's English abilities. And maybe, again, it's because this is my area of expertise, but again, it's a little offensive for me. So if I'm going to attest to someone's abilities, I want to attest. I want to be able to have proof. So I want a TOEFL, an IELTS, a transcript, certificate, or the English 3, which is my favorite. So we have some pretty strict J-1 policies in general. We limit our exchange visitors who are unpaid to 1 year at KUMC. We work very closely with legal and HR to do that. We require that if they are paid, they have a HR title with a full-time position and pay. Again, we don't allow PIs to attest or do interviews due to the inherent bias, shared native language, the desire to get the individual here without truly understanding the risks that are inherent with someone having such limited English. We are in a position of protecting our university from lawsuits and any issues. I remember a situation I wanted to share where we had a program where we had high-level medical personnel, physicians coming to KU for 3-month clinical observerships. One of the individuals had previously been in the United States at a very well-known medical, academic health institution for 3 years. And when he arrived on his B1 for our program, his English was not very good. He could not understand basic English. So we also do not accept transfers to our institution without having our own proof of their English proficiency. So something to think about. We do, again, take standardized test, degree, and I would say one of the best things we did was work with English 3 to have this as our standard for people who don't already have proof of English proficiency. And one of the reasons why is because English 3, working with their team, Moroni and other people, they are so polite and supportive of our knowledge and our areas of expertise. They don't try to tell us what to do or how to do it. And at the time I was conducting an English interview, they actually were using and implementing some of my questions into the interview at the time, just so we could have an interview the way I liked it. So they kind of tailored our interview, but they, put it on their platform. It's one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had, and I consider them all really close colleagues and friends because of their ability to just support. And they're truly here to help us meet our obligations with a keen sense of the subtle nuances between institutions. So they're not going to force anything or act like their way is the only way. So it's really, they're very humble. I think that's the best way to describe English 3, the team. They're very humble individuals, and I just appreciate them so much. Okay, next slide, I think. So I realized that there are a lot of challenges when you think about changing policy in general. We have other policies that have had more pushback, so I understand that. I've been pretty fortunate in that we haven't had a lot of pushback relative to this regulation. I mean, just because we said, well, this is the way it is, and people followed along. We also make it convenient for them. English 3 is convenient, it's cost effective. I would say the success is that it's just normal. You wake up and you're 10 years down the road, So sometimes when you're in the process of making change, it's hard, but then you just live into it and it's positive for everybody. It also makes sure that we're aligned with the regulations. And I can't emphasize that enough, to have a standardized, unbiased alignment to protect you and your institution and the international individual. At the end of the day, I worry a lot about the experience of our exchange visitors. I think some people, some of our PIs think that it's getting here and just having the opportunity to be in the US is the end all. But I want it to be a rich cultural experience where the exchange visitor feels safe. We talk a lot about their rights to vacation, to time off, to engage in culture, because we want the overall experience in Kansas and at KU to be amazing. We want to be a destination for work, research, and exchange.
By the way, I appreciate that comment, Kimberly, because in the surveys that we do to scholars, one of the questions we often ask is, what are you looking forward to most about your upcoming experience? And a lot of them will say just the generic meeting new people, exciting research that they're excited about, working with a specific PI. Those are common responses. But I will also say that a lot of them say cultural experiences, and they'll highlight specific ones, going to a New York Knicks game, or my favorite, I think, of all time was a scholar saying to get to meet and know people of many colors. And that one was like, made me pause and think for a second and think of where these scholars are coming from. I've lived abroad in a number of places, and we have a unique multicultural experience here in the U.S. that is not necessarily common. If you go to China, you meet mostly Chinese. If you go to most places in Latin America, you meet mostly Latin Americans, and it's similar in most places. And so we have a unique draw of come and get to know others and meet others from many different backgrounds who have many different experiences, and we appreciate that, especially in our offices and at our institutions. And so I just would highlight that. Okay, so getting leadership buy-in, I would say that addressing the most common areas of pushback if you do look to make changes. So number one is hey, this will impact our ability to bring scholars. Sometimes PIs will even say things like, I had one co-presenter at one point said that they had PIs saying, hey, you're harming cancer research. And so they put a lot of pressure on that. But what we have seen is that across all institutions that we're working with, having English proficiency policies in place does not reduce the number of scholars coming. I would highlight the vast majority of scholars. But I think 71% is the number that hit the minimum requirement the first time they take our test. And then within a month, I think it was that 93% of those who weren't able to, so about 98% of all individuals are able to meet that requirement within 1 month. And of those individuals that don't, two things happen. So if they engage with a tutor, in our experience, 100% are able to meet that within a month. If they do not engage with a tutor, there's been a few times where a scholar doesn't come, and then the department invites another individual. But that is very rare in our experience. Almost always what this does is it highlights a potential challenge. It allows the scholar time to address the challenge, and then the program continues as if uninterrupted. Or it allows the institution to adjust the definition of the program and what they're inviting the scholar on, and to adjust make adjustments to the program. So what we've seen, general statement across the board, is this does not reduce the numbers of incoming scholars. I will say that we've seen a very stark transition. So in 2016, I think it was about 70 to 75% of scholars taking our interview were Chinese. And now today that number is like, it fluctuates, but each month to month it's somewhere between 5 and 12%, and so it's dramatically lower. And so I will say that the pass rates have significantly improved, more of the tests are taken in Europe and Latin America. And then next thing is this will delay the process. So like I said earlier, the primary focus areas for the scholars is that it's convenient and that it's fast. So we really worked to address that. And then, hey, we don't want to add any cost to the department or to the scholars. What we've seen is almost all institutions will forward that cost to the scholar. Some, like Mario was going to present, and Houston Methodist, they'll purchase a set of vouchers for their scholars. Or I see Baylor's on here. The Baylor main campus will purchase vouchers for their scholars, or they'll do that on occasion. But that is a very different. Talking about, say, $99 for a test. We typically don't see that as a meaningful area of pushback. Kimberly, I think you are on mute.
Sorry, thank you. So getting leadership buy-in and key benefits of removing the PI interview. We've talked already about this. I'm really interested if anybody wants to share in the chat as well, like any of the obstacles you've come across transitioning from PI interviews, and also, getting leadership buy-in at your institution. Again, each institution is different. Mine, my boss is very supportive, and he really listens to the issues. We believe that, the key things are alignment with the regulations, decreased workload on your staff in your office, in the international office. I think this is really important. Having that consistency of arrival with proficiency, which promotes a healthier, more sustainable, exchange visitor population ship, and it also promotes a better relationship with the PI. Now, having said that, we have been told that we are a stunning block to cancer research at the University of Kansas Medical Center. So we love to use that phrase. It's now our catchphrase that we're stunning blocks. Because sometimes, as you know, there is a process for collecting all of the items we need in order to issue a DS 2019. It takes time, and we're not always on the PI's time. Again, they expect it in a week because as they told us, it only takes 15 minutes to issue a DS 2019. So they can't understand why it takes us a month to be able to do that. So there are things that come up with the PIs, lots of explaining. But at the end of the day, relative to the English proficiency, you want to remove the burden from the PIs. They have enough going on. We cannot emphasize enough the experience of the exchange visitor. What ways can you support them? And let's say that they need to come in with that, minimum English proficiency to participate in the program in English, to participate in cultural exchange for a safe experience. What other ways can you support them? So we have some workshops that we offer that's across the board, available to anyone who speaks English as a second language, or who speaks English as a first language, but culturally it's different and their accent is different. So we have workshops on presentation, workshops on pronunciation. We have cultural workshops. And we also offer individualized tutoring for scientific writing, writing resumes, writing bio sketches, things like that. I think one of the really important things to touch on is it can promote diversity in the lab. If we don't make it too easy to only have individuals who speak another language in a lab, and we promote this idea of recruiting because they have to prove English proficiency anyway, you can have better diversity. And then when you have diversity in the lab, everybody's speaking English instead of maybe your one researcher from Brazil who speaks English and Portuguese, doesn't understand all of the other language being spoken, which is either Russian or Chinese or something else. So again, remembering that idea of diversity, but also being inclusive in a positive work environment.
A comment on that really quickly. So one of the institutions that we work with is they had a scholar, a Brazilian scholar, file a formal complaint with the Department of State because the primary language spoken in the lab was Chinese, and so that was an interesting one, and so that was just a quick comment on that. I would also say that the Department of State is generally aware of the challenges that ROs face or the politics that they may face in their institutions. And they're generally supportive of wanting of wanting to support you in the process of achieving alignment. And so for them, what we've heard them consistently say, what's been reiterated to me by multiple individuals, is that if you are experiencing any challenges, or if you would like more support from the Department of State in adjusting policies, they very much want to be supportive, and you're a partner in your corner through the process. And so whether that's writing providing a letter directly from the Department of State that you can then engage with leadership with, or having kind of an open conversation with the Department of State reps that you're communicating with, they have across the board generally expressed interest in wanting to support ROs in ensuring consistency in English proficiency.
I'd like to add on to just that point about, filing a complaint. I think English is the base. Like, that is the base of ensuring a positive experience. Because if a person isn't able to express themselves in English, not only can they not forge relationships with others and connections, they are more susceptible to some of the bad practices that we see in labs. They don't even know how to articulate maybe some things that are going on in the lab, some things that aren't, acceptable. They're not able to articulate the fact that they want to take vacation. So that's just like the baseline assurance that the person can communicate their needs and communicate any issues to you. So recommendations for best practices, which we're all interested in. We want to have best practices. That objective measure of English language proficiency. It ensures consistency, it improves compliance, it reduces the burden on the PI, the hosting department, and on the international office. It improves the J-1 experience, and it's convenient for offices like ours to manage it. And I think Moroni also, they can even streamline it with the software that some of the institutions use. That's not something I'm familiar with, but I love the fact that we have access to the dashboard with English 3, and that the test results are emailed directly to me and the other AROs and ROs at our institution.
Yes. So what that means there is just there's integrations with Synopsys or Teradata where the score just goes directly in, and so it becomes a very automated, hands-off process for those institutions. So we're approaching the end of the time. I'll do one quick highlight, but if there are any questions, throw the questions in the chat, and I'm going to really quickly just highlight a few things really quickly. So the scholar experience with the English 3 interview is essentially, you go on, you register for it, you can take it right away. You don't have to wait for a time. You don't have to travel to a location. TOEFL and IELTS are often $200 to $300, where this is going to be $99. So it's about a third, half to a third the cost. But the thing is, they can take it right away, get their score within 24 hours. And with our approach, I know there was some conversation Micah had highlighted in the chat about AI. One thing that we've seen is challenges with institutions where individuals received a high test score and then they arrive without proficiency. Mm-hmm. What we're seeing with that is, from our perspective, is because testing institutions are not innovating with the softwares, to actually provide an online experience that's native to online that makes sense. So what we're doing is we're essentially trying to put the scholar into the scenarios where they are offering an open-ended real-time response to a question that they don't know is coming. So we have about 20 questions that we ask. It takes 25 minutes, and we ask questions about their cultural experience, about their program, what they hope to accomplish, about safety, what would you do in these different situations, and they don't know what questions are coming. And oftentimes our raters will review the questions and they'll hear, hey, that was a really fluent response, but it was to the wrong question. And so, so having a rater that's involved in the process is really key, because they're trained to spot little things like looking off the screen at the same spot, or we've had funny things where like a scholar would be responding to a question, their mouth is moving, but there's a different voice coming from a different part of the room. And so it's like, so we just see all these funny things. And so for us, security is a really key thing. But I think that the approach where it's very quick, it's very convenient as to the time, and is unique in the sense of if you ask somebody a question, they either understand the question or they don't. If they're able to respond, you're able to look at to evaluate their response, the fluency they're using, the vocabulary they're using, like you're able to understand, evaluate their comprehension based upon their responses there. So that's kind of the way that we've approached it. And then we take that video, we assign a score, and each institution has a different score. So for example, if they're coming to interact with students and they'll be working in a lab, then you would probably set a higher score. But typically the most common response is a 3. And then and then you would have a dashboard where you would not only just see the score, but you would also see access to the videos. I would highlight that one of the first schools we worked with was Texas A&M, and Virginia Bloom there. She was previously doing all of the interviews herself, and she appreciated that. So what she actually did is, they had a high volume of incoming scholars back then, and I'm not sure what the numbers are now, but she would actually go in and she'd watch the video for every single one of these individuals, so that when they arrived for check-in, she was able to call them out by name and mention something that they had said. And I was just wildly impressed with that. And imagine the nerves that are calmed for a scholar when that happens. And so anyway, I wanted to call that out. But yeah, you would get access to a dashboard, and so you'd pretty quickly and seamlessly be able to see who has proficiency and who doesn't. And I don't know, anything else you'd want to highlight, Kimberly?
No, I think you did a great job. The dashboard is amazing. The recordings are amazing. It's very simple, very accessible, and we've really enjoyed the partnership. But beyond that, I just want to encourage people to, consider, their policies, their processes, and how we as a community can support them if they feel like there's, change that's needed.
All right, thank you so much for attending, and we'll send the slides and the recording in follow-up communication.
Thanks so much for joining us today.